The Slaughter Cinema maze at Halloween Horror Nights in Universal Studios Orlando is genius. Now, I'm not saying it's genius in the sense that it's going to be one of the best houses ever. I definitely don't think that. However, I think that this is really great for a few reasons.
When the credits roll, heads roll.
Number one is marketing. The Slaughter Sinema name, although being new, could be one of the franchises that they continue to bring back in future houses. The house is split up into many horror B movies that you would walk through in the house. All these are very distinct and could easily be seen as horror B movies from the 80s, as that appears to be the central theme of this year's Halloween Horror Nights, at least for the most part. Now, I believe they could bring back Slaughter Sinema in future years, putting new horror B movies into those slots, but theming them to either a different time period or to different subgenres. Let's say maybe one year Halloween Horror Nights has a sci-fi theme, and they can just take Slaughter Sinema and be like, hey, okay, let's put in some horror B movies in there that are kind of all sci-fi themed. You know, maybe one for aliens, maybe one for robots, etc., etc. Just simple stuff like that, and you can keep the Slaughter Sinema name coming back, and it will be used in the branding, right? It could become as powerful as some of the IPs that you use, like, you know, a Halloween, a recurring thing. Obviously, it'll never be as big as Halloween, but you get the idea. It could be used as a part of your marketing. Whereas, you know, now, because it's a new type of house, it's an original house, it's new, you know, it's only really attracting a lot of the regulars that come. Not so much people who have never been before, right? That's something that like a Stranger Things is going to do. But let's say I'm like kind of debating whether or not I want to go to Halloween Horror Nights this year. None of the IPs really hit me. But then I see Slaughter Sinema's coming back, and I'm like, oh, I liked that when I went a few years back. All right, let me go now. Now, compare that to a Dead Exposure, which is coming back this year. The thing about Dead Exposure is that it's a part of a narrative. It's a part of this world. And I know it's a prequel, but if you don't know the story of the first Dead Exposure, you might be left a little bit lost with this one. And you might not necessarily have the incentive to come back just because you see Dead Exposure again, right? Whereas if you see Slaughter Sinema again, because there's no overarching narrative other than the fact that this is just the movies, you don't necessarily have to remember a narrative in order to enjoy the houses or to come back to them. So unlike Dead Exposure or some of these other types of houses, you don't need to remember a narrative from the previous house in order to fully enjoy this house, right? So new people can easily enjoy the next Slaughter Sinema without being felt lost out or whatever, like they missed the last house and now they can't fully understand this one. They won't be feeling that. And returnees won't have to worry about trying to remember everything from the last Slaughter Sinema because it's completely new stories in this one, but it's just still attached to the same name, which is what brought them back there in the first place. So I think it could be used very well for marketing.
When the credits roll, heads roll.
The next reason why I think it's genius is for creativity. I think because the house is split up into multiple sections, it can allow people at Universe Creative who have ideas for houses that aren't necessarily long enough or grand enough to take up their own house. It could be a good spot to throw them in there to Slaughter Sinema as a little section of it, as opposed to it being its own house when it doesn't have enough content to fill the own house. This will not only encourage people at Universal Creative to be more creative and be more out there with their ideas, but it will also, you know, pretty much reward people for having ideas that maybe aren't necessarily good enough for their own house, but are good enough to fill a slot in Slaughter Sinema, and it will just allow people at the company to build morale as well as give us more content at the event. This will also greatly benefit the consumer because now we're getting to see these ideas kind of come to fruition that maybe in the past we would have never seen before because they were never big enough to fill up their own house. Now we can see them as a subsection in this much bigger house.
We're going to be going to the drive-in of Cary, Ohio, where we will see 9 B movies. Now, the B movies were created by Universal Creative, and these are ideas that they wanted to put into houses or put into streets, but just didn't quite make the cut.
When the credits roll, heads roll.
The final reason why I think this is genius is because of the variety that it brings to the event. Now, think about it this way. We have 10 houses at Halloween Horror Nights this year. However, because we have Slaughter Sinema in there, it's almost kind of like 12 because Slaughter Sinema is basically 3 houses thrown into one. Because it has 3 different concepts in there that really don't relate much at all, aside from the fact they all could be horror B movies in the 80s. That's really it. So essentially, going through this house, instead of just experiencing one theme or one type of movie or one type of concept, we're experiencing 3 or potentially even more concepts in one house, which is something they've done plenty of times before, but usually they all have kind of a connecting theme to them. It really only started kind of branching off from that and taking things that really weren't related much and putting them together back with Blumhouse last year, where the only connecting thing was that they were all made by Blumhouse. They really actually had nothing in common. And that's kind of the same thing here. They're all just 80s horror B movies. They don't actually have anything directly in common with them. So yeah, blending them together will be difficult, but if they can manage to do that, then it will just be a great house that basically will be like a 3-in-1 or a 4-in-1 or whatever many in one this ends up being. So do I think Slaughter Sinema will be the best house at this year's event? No, I don't think that, but I do think that it's a really smart idea, and I think that if they do decide to bring it back in the future, it can work very well in their favor and can be used very well to bring more people to the event and bring people back to the event. And it will work in a way that houses like Dead Exposure and other narrative-based original houses can't necessarily do. And that's why I think Slaughter Sinema is a genius idea. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
When the credits roll, heads roll.